So when I talk about religious dictatorship, what does it mean? It means that religion is used to legitimize the power of one man, of one group, of one tribe, etc. The religious is the basis of the foundation of the power of the dictatorship. It means also that laws are enshrined in religious beliefs and practices, what we call the Sharia in the Arab world and the Islamic world. And also third, that everybody was opposing this political system would be labeled as heretics or as somebody against the religion, etc., etc. So this is the kind of dictatorship we have, let's say, in Saudi Arabia or in Iran. And everybody knows that this dictatorship are extremely harsh against women, against minorities, against everybody, you know, who is opposing the political system, and they can be very brutal, very harsh, and extremely harmful to the society. On the other hand, you have also secularist dictatorship, like in Egypt for the moment, like in Algeria, like in Tunisia, we used to have also secularist dictatorship. And this kind of dictatorship is proposing itself to the outer world as a modern society, as a modern regime, etc. But what you discover is, in fact, it's the same political system, whether it's said religious or secularist. It's always the same political system, which means power to one man, to a very small group, having all the wealth, all the power, etc., etc., and treating the rest of the people as not as citizens, but as, like, I wouldn't say human animals, because this would be exaggerated, but, you know, a subject, not citizen, but subject. And at that time, I saw very clearly that, in fact, when you talk about secularism, it's a wide spectrum. And in this wide spectrum, you would have people, you know, really true secularists and Democrats. On the other hand, you would find people who are really secularist, but really supporting dictatorship, seeing no problem with any kind of dictatorship. On the other hand, and this was very surprising for me to see that, in fact, also the Islamism is a wide spectrum, where they have their right wing, you know, awful people like Taliban, like, you know, like ISIS, like awful people, really awful people, extremely dangerous for democracy, extremely dangerous for women's rights, for human rights, etc., etc. But because it's a very wide spectrum, I was very surprised to see that, in fact, a small part of this spectrum has accepted democracy and said, look, we can understand that we have to adapt. Because the thinking that, you know, Islam is a homogeneous movement, or secularism is a homogeneous movement, this is a huge error. It's not homogeneous. It's never homogeneous. You always have to consider that you are dealing with wide spectrum.
I want to point that secularism is the result of the French Revolution, 1789. So whenever you read in the newspapers that secularism in France, for instance, is enacted in such a way that it antagonized the Muslims, let me just remind you that at the time there were no Muslim migration in France, and the religious power was the Catholic Church. In other words, secularism has been developed in order to resist the political influence of the Catholic Church. During a long time in France, for instance, the fight against laicity was led by the Christian groups, but now it's mostly led by Muslim fundamentalists. And their declared aim, is also to change laws, using various ways to attack women's rights. For instance, in 2008, they attempted to have the law changed, law on marriage, in which, I quote, They wanted this to be inscribed in the law. Virginity is an essential condition for marriage. In the first instance, it was accepted by a judge, and the French state had to step in a very brutal way, saying, no way, we can't have that, it's against the Constitution and equal rights. And as you know, it's everywhere in the newspapers, there were numerous demands for non-mixity between men and women in various places, like hospitals, swimming pools, etc., etc. I think the education is where the Muslim fundamentalist groups operate in a very forceful way. They demand the end of teaching of evolutionarism, Darwinism in science, natural science. They want creationism to be taught. What is interesting is that the Catholic Church wants everybody to be denied the right to contraception and abortion. Now, looking at Muslim rules now, equal right to inheritance is the law of France, equal rights between men and women. But devout Muslim women who believe that they should have half that what their brothers have can donate freely. They are not forced. So it's really important for us to realize that we should not accept the idea that secular laws infringe upon individual freedom of belief and practice.
My belief is, do you accept human rights values? Do you accept law of democracy? This is the divide, and this must be, said to the young generation, because if they are trapped in this contradiction between Islamist and secularist or laicist, etc., we are losing ground, we are losing a lot of time, and we are unfortunately saying that we are, preparing new conflicts